She was stripped of everything by her own daughter in a single phone call that lasted less than a minute. And the most painful part was not the loss, but the cold, almost cruel tone in the voice of the child she had spent her entire life loving. Eleanor Whitmore sat frozen in the hospital waiting room, the phone still pressed to her ear, even though the call had ended long ago, as if she were still waiting for a different sentence, an explanation, or at least an apology. But there was nothing, only a heavy silence pressing against her chest like a stone. "Mom, we needed the money. You'll be fine." Vanessa's voice echoed in her mind, sharp, decisive, without hesitation, without a trace of emotion. Eleanor did not cry, not because she was not in pain, but because the pain was too great, too sudden, freezing every feeling inside her, and in that moment, tears became meaningless. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once trembled when she held Vanessa for the first time, that wiped her tears when she fell, that stayed awake through countless nights caring for her when she was sick. All those memories, all those years, now seemed to exist only in her own mind. Her name was called. A nurse stood at the door with a gentle smile, but it did not reach her. Eleanor stood up and walked slowly, like someone who had just fallen out of her familiar reality. The doctor said she was healthy, her blood pressure stable, she just needed more rest. The words passed through her like a passing breeze. Her mind was somewhere else, in a memory buried beneath layers of sorrow, now slowly resurfacing. 3 days before Arthur passed away, he had given her an envelope. That morning had been strangely peaceful. Arthur still made coffee as usual, still placed 2 slices of toast on the table, but his eyes, there was something different in them. Deeper, heavier, as if he knew something she did not. "Keep this safe, Ellie," he said, his voice low and steady. "Don't open it yet, not until you really need to." Eleanor had simply smiled back then, thinking it was just one of his familiar careful habits. Arthur had always been the one who planned ahead, always preparing for everything, even things others would never think of. She had placed the envelope in the drawer among old documents and forgotten about it until now. As she stepped out of the hospital, Eleanor realized a stark truth. She no longer had a car, no longer had the mountain vacation house, no longer had anything she once believed belonged to her. At least, that was what Vanessa believed. A cold wind brushed past, pulling her back to the present. A bus stopped in front of her. Eleanor stepped on and chose a seat by the window. Seattle passed before her eyes. Familiar streets, small shops, people rushing past one another like shadows, each carrying their own story, their own secret. And so did Eleanor, a secret that even she, until this moment, had only just begun to remember. When the bus stopped at her house, she stepped down. The old wooden door creaked in a familiar way as she opened it. Everything was still there, the armchair Arthur used to sit in, the wall clock ticking steadily, but the air had changed, no longer warm, no longer a refuge. Eleanor walked straight into the bedroom, without hesitation, without delay. The drawer opened, the envelope was still there, untouched, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked it up, not out of fear, but from a strange feeling, as if her life was not over, as if something still remained unsaid, undiscovered. Eleanor sat on the bed. The fading afternoon light filled the room with a soft, melancholic glow. She looked at her name written on the envelope in Arthur's familiar handwriting, the same handwriting she had seen for decades, yet never had it felt this heavy. She opened the envelope, slowly, carefully. Inside was not just a letter, but a series of documents, legal papers, contracts, official seals, and a handwritten note. Eleanor began to read, line by line, word by word, her breathing gradually quickening. Arthur was not the ordinary man she had believed him to be all her life. He was not just a mechanic, he was an investor, a man who had quietly built wealth step by step in absolute silence. They had not just owned a vacation house, they had much more, far more, and most importantly, all of it now belonged to Eleanor. Her hands tightened around the papers, a faint smile crossed her lips, not joy, not relief, but awakening. Vanessa believed she had lost everything. Vanessa believed she was just an old woman with nothing left but memories. But the truth was completely the opposite. Eleanor's eyes changed, no longer clouded, no longer weak. There was something else now. Clarity, control, and a decision forming, sharper with every passing second. There were no tears, no resentment, only a single thought echoing in her mind, cold and resolute. If her daughter had chosen to treat her as if she had no value, then it was time for her to learn the true value of what she had lost. The envelope in Eleanor's hands was not just a secret, it was a doorway. And when she opened it, she did not just see the truth, she saw her entire life under a completely different light. The papers in her hands were not ordinary documents. They were thick, firm, printed on a kind of paper she had never touched before. Each page stamped, signed, filled with legal language that she had to read slowly, piece by piece, as if afraid that if she read too quickly, everything would disappear. Arthur's letter lay on top. Eleanor opened it, the familiar handwriting steady and firm, just like the man himself. Ellie, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer by your side. I am so sorry for keeping this secret for so long, but I did it for 2 reasons. First, I did not want you to worry, and second, I did not believe Vanessa would understand the value of what we have. Eleanor paused, her heartbeat skipping. Arthur had known, or at least he had anticipated. She continued reading. For the past 30 years, I have been investing, not large amounts from the beginning, but step by step, 1 house, then 2, a small share that grew over time. I did not tell you because I knew you would want to use that money for Vanessa, for the family, for immediate needs. But I wanted to build something lasting, something that could not be spent in a single impulsive decision. Eleanor swallowed, her hand tightening around the letter, memories beginning to fall into place. The times Arthur had been away without clear reasons, the phone calls he always ended quickly when she walked into the room, the small amounts of money he said were saved from work. None of it had ever been random. Right now, Ellie, you are the sole owner of Whitmore Holdings. Eleanor frowned slightly. Whitmore Holdings, a name she had never heard before. She turned to the documents beneath, a company, not small, not simple, a list of assets stretching before her like a map she had never known she stood at the center of. 5 properties, spanning from Seattle to Portland, a high-rise apartment building in the city center, 2 major investments in growing tech companies, and bank accounts with figures that made Eleanor read them twice before she could believe it. Not a few thousand, not tens of thousands, but numbers she had never imagined in her life. But that was not what made her stop. Her eyes fixed on a single line, an address, a building. Eleanor recognized it instantly. It was where Vanessa was living. A luxury apartment her daughter had proudly claimed, "Marcus bought me a better life." Eleanor slowly set the paper down. No, Marcus had not bought it. Vanessa had not bought it. None of them had. That building belonged to her. A long silence filled the room. No sound, no chaos, just a truth spreading slowly, like cold water seeping into every corner of Eleanor's mind. She had not lost everything. She had never lost. The only one who truly knew nothing was Vanessa. Eleanor leaned back against the bed, the ceiling above seeming farther than usual. She closed her eyes, but the images did not fade. Vanessa's voice, the coldness, the indifference. "You'll be fine." A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. Not joy, not bitterness, just realization. Vanessa had thought she was weak, that she had no choice, that she would accept everything as she always had, but this time would be different. Eleanor opened her eyes, her gaze no longer clouded, no longer uncertain. She picked up her phone, her finger pausing for a second on the screen before she began searching. Arthur had left a name, a lawyer, Daniel Caldwell, the man who had helped him build all of this, the one who understood every detail, the only person besides Arthur who knew who Eleanor truly was at this moment. The phone rang once, twice, Caldwell speaking. The voice was deep, professional. Eleanor took a slow breath. "This is Eleanor Whitmore." A brief silence on the other end, then the voice changed. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been expecting your call." Eleanor was not surprised. Arthur had always prepared for everything, even this moment. "I need to understand everything." Her voice did not tremble, did not weaken. It was simply clear. "You will," Caldwell replied, "but before that, there is something you need to know." Eleanor remained silent. "The sale of your mountain house, it is illegal." Her heart pounded sharply in her chest. Caldwell continued, calm but precise. "Your daughter had no legal authority to sell it. None." Eleanor closed her eyes for a second, not out of shock, but confirmation. Vanessa had not only betrayed her, she had made a mistake, a serious one. And this time, Eleanor was no longer the woman who stood still and endured. She opened her eyes, her gaze sharpened, clear like a line that could not be bent. "Good," she said, her voice low but firm. "Then we start from there." On the other end, Caldwell did not answer immediately, but he understood. This was no longer an abandoned woman. This was a woman who had just realized her own power. And the most dangerous thing was that she was not in a hurry. She would not shout. She would not take revenge immediately. She would wait, she would observe, and when she acted, there would be no mistakes. Eleanor set the phone down. The room was the same, but she was not. A light breeze moved through the window, the curtain swaying gently, as if marking an invisible line that had just been drawn. Before it was a gentle mother who always gave in. After it was a woman holding more than anyone around her could imagine. And somewhere far away, Vanessa still believed she had won. She did not know that everything had only just begun. The meeting with Lawyer Caldwell was not loud, not dramatic, yet it was the moment when everything began to shift in a direction that could not be reversed. His office sat high in a glass tower in downtown Seattle, where light reflected off every surface, making everything feel clear, cold, and impossible to hide. Eleanor walked in wearing a simple coat, her silver hair neatly tied back, carrying the appearance of a woman anyone would assume to be just an ordinary widow, nothing remarkable, but Caldwell knew that was not the truth. He stood as she entered, his gaze changing immediately, not sympathy, but respect. "Mrs. Whitmore?" he said, his voice low and steady. Eleanor nodded without smiling. She was no longer here as someone in need of help. She was here to understand and to decide. The files were placed on the table, thick and heavy with everything they contained. Caldwell opened them section by section, explaining each detail, each line, every legal clause Arthur had arranged before his passing. Eleanor listened without interrupting, without asking questions right away, letting everything settle, then slowly assembling it into a complete picture in her mind. Whitmore Holdings did not just exist. It operated. It generated profit. It controlled a network of assets that outsiders could never see unless they knew exactly where to look. And most importantly, everything was secured within a legal structure so tight it was nearly untouchable. "Your husband was exceptionally careful," Caldwell said, unable to hide his admiration. Eleanor did not respond. She had always known Arthur was careful, but she had never understood the extent of it until now. Caldwell turned to another document and slid it toward her. "This is the transaction your daughter made." Eleanor looked down. The numbers, the signatures, the dates, all clear and all wrong. "She sold it under false authority," Caldwell continued, his tone sharpening. "She used a document that does not grant her the right to transfer ownership." Eleanor looked at her own signature on the copied authorization form, a blurred memory surfacing. After Arthur's funeral, Vanessa had handed her several documents. She had signed them, without reading, without thinking, trusting, a mistake, but not one that could not be corrected. "Can we reverse it?" Eleanor asked, her voice so calm it slightly surprised Caldwell. "Immediately," he replied. "The buyers will be compensated, but the property returns to you legally. It never left your ownership." Eleanor gave a slight nod. No emotion, no anger, just confirmation. Caldwell watched her for a few seconds before asking the question he knew mattered. "Do you want to press charges against your daughter?" The question hung in the air, heavy and sharp, the fastest, clearest, and most ruthless path. Eleanor did not answer immediately. She looked out the glass window, the city stretching below, people moving like small points of light without clear form. She thought of Vanessa, not the Vanessa of today, but the child she once was, the little girl who held her hand, who called for her when she was afraid, who believed her mother was her entire world. When had everything begun to change? When had that distance appeared? When had love turned into calculation? Eleanor turned back, her gaze not soft but not cold either, just clear. "No," she said. Caldwell frowned slightly. "You're certain?" Eleanor nodded. "I'm not interested in punishment." A pause. Then she continued, slowly, each word carefully considered. "I'm interested in understanding and consequences." Caldwell did not ask more, he understood. Some people take revenge with explosion, others are more patient, more dangerous. "Then we proceed quietly," he said. Eleanor nodded. No one knows, not yet. Caldwell closed the file. It will take a few weeks to regain full operational control, but from this moment, everything is already yours. Eleanor stood up. She did not feel relief, did not feel victory, only clarity, as if a layer of fog had been lifted from her eyes. As she stepped out of the building, a cold wind passed through, but she did not shrink. She stood straight, looking ahead. The city was the same, but she was not. In the days that followed, Eleanor began a life no one around her noticed. In the morning, she still went to the market as usual, still chatted with her neighbor Linda, who always looked at her with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. "I heard about Vanessa," Linda said once, her voice gentle. "It must be hard being alone now." Eleanor simply smiled, just enough, neither confirming nor denying. "I'll be fine," she said, and she meant it. In the afternoons, Eleanor sat in the living room, reading every document Caldwell sent, learning, understanding, analyzing, financial terms, investment structures, cash flows, all gradually becoming familiar. She was no longer standing outside, she was stepping in, one step at a time, slow but certain. A call came one late evening, Caldwell. "The Mountain House has been restored to your name," he said. Eleanor closed her eyes for a second, not from emotion but from something deeper, a piece of memory returning to its rightful place. "Good," she replied. "And the apartment building?" "2 more weeks," Caldwell said. "Then you will have full control." Eleanor looked out the window, the city glowing in the night. Somewhere, Vanessa was still living in a world she believed was hers, a luxury apartment, a life she thought she had secured. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, a thought passing through her mind, clear as a straight line. Vanessa did not know that the apartment had never belonged to her, did not know that everything she stood on actually belonged to the person she had just betrayed. Eleanor Whitmore began living 2 lives within the same body, and the most unsettling part was that no one noticed. In the mornings, she was still the gentle widow the neighborhood had been used to seeing for years. She stepped out of the house with her old cloth bag, walked to the grocery store on the corner, paused to chat with Linda, the neighbor who always looked at her with a mix of sympathy and curiosity. "I heard your daughter left for Europe," Linda said softly, as if afraid of hurting her. "Must be lonely." Eleanor gave a faint smile, just enough to keep any further questions away. "People go where they think they belong," she replied, not sad, not blaming. Just a sentence Linda could not fully understand. But in the afternoon, Eleanor was no longer that woman. The living room door closed, the laptop opened, and an entirely different world unfolded before her. Financial reports, charts, contracts, numbers that no longer felt distant. At first, they were a maze, but Eleanor was not someone who got lost easily. She read, she learned, she understood, piece by piece. Every day, Caldwell sent more documents, and every day, Eleanor became sharper, not through years of prior experience, but through the absolute focus of someone who had lost all illusions and no longer had anything to fear. Whitmore Holdings was not just a name on paper. It was a living system. It operated. It generated money. It controlled assets that people like Vanessa and Marcus did not even know existed. A chain of apartments, a small commercial complex, an investment in a rapidly growing tech company, and at the center of it all was Eleanor. Yet the outside world still saw her as a woman slowly losing everything. Linda stopped by one afternoon with a homemade cake. "I made too much," she said, placing the box on the table. "Thought you might want some." Eleanor thanked her and invited her in. Linda looked around, her eyes passing over the worn furniture, the family photos, the traces of a life that had once been whole. "Have you heard from Vanessa?" Linda asked. Eleanor shook her head. "She's busy." "In Europe?" Linda frowned. "I saw something online. Looks like she's having quite the life." Eleanor did not ask more. She did not need to. She already knew. The night before, Caldwell had sent her an unofficial report, not about assets, but about Vanessa, photos, spending, transactions, Marcus appearing in all of them, an expensive watch, a luxurious dinner, a 5-star hotel, money flowing out faster than anything Eleanor had ever seen. No investment, no plan, just spending. And beneath it all was something Vanessa did not know. Marcus had no real money, no real assets. What he was using was money from selling Eleanor's property and loans, many loans. Eleanor did not tell Linda that. She simply smiled. "She deserves to enjoy her life," she said. Linda nodded, but her expression was not entirely convinced. "Still, I hope she remembers you." Eleanor did not respond. She did not need Vanessa to remember her, not now. After Linda left, the house returned to silence. Eleanor sat down and opened her laptop. A new email from Caldwell, the subject line simple, "Update." Eleanor opened it. The first line made her pause. "The Mountain House transaction has been fully reversed." Eleanor let out a quiet breath, not relief, but confirmation. A part of the past had returned to its rightful place. But the next line was what truly mattered. "We have identified financial irregularities linked to Marcus Hale." Eleanor leaned forward, reading slowly. Marcus had taken loans, not one but many, using Vanessa's name in some cases, using their current apartment as collateral, something he did not even own. A mistake, a very serious mistake. Eleanor closed the laptop for a few seconds, closed her eyes, not to avoid, but to see more clearly. Vanessa had not only left her, she was stepping into a trap she could not see, and Marcus was not the one who would pull her out. He was the one who had pushed her into it. Eleanor opened her eyes, her gaze unchanged. Not angry, not panicked, only aware that everything was moving exactly in the direction she had envisioned. She stood and walked to the window. Seattle stretched out before her, the lights beginning to glow as evening settled in. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was laughing, believing she had escaped an old life to step into something better. Eleanor tilted her head slightly, a thought clear without needing to be spoken. Her daughter did not know that the apartment she was living in did not belong to her, did not know that the money being spent was turning into chains that would bind her future, did not know that the person she trusted most was her greatest danger. Eleanor turned back and walked to the table. She poured herself a cup of tea and set it down without drinking. She was not in a hurry. She did not need to be. Time, for the first time in her life, was on her side. And in that silence, Eleanor was no longer the one abandoned. She was the one observing, waiting, and when everything collapsed, she would be there, not to save immediately, but to ensure that this time, the lesson would be carved deep enough to never be forgotten. The collapse did not come with a loud explosion. It came through small cracks that quietly spread, and in Paris, Vanessa Whitmore still had not realized that the ground beneath her feet had been breaking apart for a long time. The first days in a foreign land felt like a dream she had long desired, golden lights stretching across the boulevards, glasses of wine shimmering under candlelight, laughter echoing among strangers who carried an air of glamour. All of it made Vanessa believe that she had finally stepped into the life she deserved. A life without limits, without the dull days beside the mother she believed had fallen behind. Marcus was always by her side during those days, always saying the things that made her believe everything had been planned, that this was only the beginning, that what they were spending was just a small part of something much bigger. Vanessa believed him, not because he was particularly convincing, but because she wanted to believe that her decision was right, that leaving her mother, selling off those old assets, was a necessary price for a better future. Money flowed out of the account like water, without hesitation, without control. Every meal was a luxury experience, every day an endless chain of spending. Vanessa had never lived like that, and that was exactly why she did not question it, because when people are living the life they have always desired, they often ignore the clearest warning signs. But then the small details began to appear. Marcus taking phone calls and stepping away without explanation. Marcus avoiding every conversation about finances. Marcus telling her she did not need to worry because everything was in his hands. Vanessa chose silence because doubt would shatter the dream she was trying to hold on to. Until that morning, when she woke up and realized the room was too quiet. No footsteps from Marcus. No sound of water running in the bathroom. No sign that another person had been there. Vanessa called his name. There was no answer. She looked around the room. His suitcase was gone. The coat he often wore had disappeared. His phone was not there. And the most frightening part was that there was no trace suggesting he would return. Vanessa picked up her phone and called him repeatedly, each ringing tone stretching endlessly before fading into silence. She sent messages, each line filled with worry, but none ever received a reply. Time slowed as if it were being pulled apart, each minute heavy, each second longer than it should be, until the anxiety turned into something else, a feeling she had experienced before but never wanted to admit. She opened her banking app just to find a sense of reassurance, some proof that everything was still fine, but what appeared in front of her made it impossible to breathe. The balance was almost zero, a series of transactions, expenses she did not remember making. But what made her blood run cold was not the money that had disappeared. It was the money she had never seen before. Loans, large transactions, contracts in her name. Vanessa stepped back, her mind spinning. She shook her head as if to reject reality. It could not be. She had never signed these. She had never agreed. But her signature was there, clear, legal, undeniable. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She answered, clinging to what felt like her last hope, but the voice on the other end carried no salvation, only the coldness of legal obligation. The person spoke of debt, of payment responsibilities, of a figure exceeding $200,000. Vanessa did not understand, or perhaps she did, but refused to accept it. She said it was a mistake, that she had not signed, that she did not know, but the response remained the same. Everything was valid, everything was binding, and she was the one responsible. Vanessa hung up, her hand trembling, no longer able to hold the phone. She sat on the edge of the bed, her eyes open but seeing nothing, fragments of memory returning. The papers Marcus had handed her, his words saying they were just formalities, the time she signed without reading, because she trusted, because she was in a hurry, because she believed everything was part of a plan, a mistake that could not be undone. Marcus had not simply left. He had prepared, calculated, used her trust as a tool. A message from the bank arrived, a final warning. Vanessa let out a dry laugh, as if her body did not know how else to respond except by breaking the silence. Just a few days ago, she had believed she was winning, believed she had stepped into a new life, believed her mother was the one left behind. But now she was the one with nothing, no money, no support, no future, only debts she did not even know where to begin with. Vanessa stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the vast city, everything still beautiful, still dazzling, but no longer hers. And in that moment, a single thought surfaced, unavoidable, impossible to delay. She had nowhere else to go, only one place left, the place she had left behind with cold indifference, the place where the person she had once underestimated still was. Vanessa closed her eyes, Eleanor's image appearing, not as a weak mother, but as something she had never fully understood. A tightness gripped her chest, making it hard to breathe, not from emotion, but from realization. She had been wrong, completely wrong, but realizing it changed nothing. She still had to go back, not as a victor, but as someone who had lost everything. And somewhere else, thousands of miles away, Eleanor Whitmore stood silently by the window, her calm gaze looking out over the city as the lights came on, her phone resting on the table, an email from Caldwell still unopened. She did not need to rush. She already knew what was happening. She had seen it before it even began. Vanessa had chosen her path, and now she was stepping into the consequences of that choice. Eleanor lifted her cup of tea, took a small sip, her expression unchanged, no pity, no anger, only a cold certainty that everything was unfolding exactly as it should. And when Vanessa returned, she would be there, not to save her immediately, but to make sure that this time her daughter would truly understand. Vanessa's return carried no sound of victory, no suitcases filled with hope, no confident gaze like the day she left, only an exhausted woman stepping out of a taxi on a gray Seattle afternoon, her hair disheveled, dark circles under her eyes, and the presence of someone completely lost. She stood in front of the building she once lived in, the place she used to proudly call home, but this time everything felt different. The security guard looked at her with unfamiliar eyes, no recognition, no polite smile, only suspicion. "Your key?" he asked. Vanessa searched her bag, her hands trembling, then realized she no longer had it. Marcus had taken everything. She had to ask for the spare key, and even then, the guard's gaze no longer carried the same respect as before. She stepped into the elevator, her heart pounding, not from exhaustion, but from a sense of unease she could not name. When the elevator doors opened, the hallway looked the same, but the air had changed, colder, more distant, as if the place no longer welcomed her. She walked into the apartment, opened the door, and the first thing that caught her eye was not familiarity, but an envelope placed neatly on the table, her name clearly written on the outside. Vanessa moved closer, opened it, read each line, and every word cut deeper into the reality she had been trying to avoid. It was an eviction notice. 30 days. She had 30 days to leave the apartment. Vanessa stood still, unmoving, her eyes fixed on the paper as if staring long enough would make the words change, but they did not. There was no mistake, no error. The company name at the bottom made her frown, a name she had never heard before, Whitmore Holdings. She repeated it in her mind, searching for a connection, but nothing came. The phone in her hand began to shake, an incoming call. She answered almost immediately, as if it were a lifeline, but the voice on the other end brought no hope, only confirmation. The apartment did not belong to her, it never had. Vanessa ended the call, her back against the wall, her mind spinning. There was no more room for denial, nothing left to hold on to. She had lost everything, not just the money, not just Marcus, but even the last place she could call shelter. A thought emerged, clear and unavoidable. She had no choice left, only one place she could go, the house she had walked away from, the person she had betrayed. Vanessa stood in front of Eleanor's house the next morning, a suitcase in her hand, her chest heavy. She did not knock right away. Her hand hovered in the air as if something unseen was holding her back. A part of her wanted to turn away, to escape, to find another path, but there was no other path. Finally, she knocked. The sound was soft but clear. The door opened. Eleanor stood there, unchanged, her calm gaze making Vanessa feel small. A moment passed between them. No embrace, no tears, only a heavy silence. "Mom," Vanessa said, her voice hoarse, no longer carrying the confidence it once had. Eleanor looked at her from head to toe, not judging but not hiding her awareness. She saw everything, the exhaustion, the collapse, the unspoken regret. "Come in," Eleanor said, her voice gentle, not warm but not cold either. Vanessa stepped inside. The house was the same. Everything was still there, but she was no longer the same person. She sat down, her hands tightly clasped together. I messed up," she said, her voice breaking. "Marcus, he left. There was no business, no plan, nothing." Eleanor did not interrupt, did not ask questions. She simply listened. Vanessa continued, each sentence pulled from deep within. "I don't have money. I don't have anywhere to go. They're coming after me for debts I didn't even know existed." A pause, then she looked up. For the first time, her eyes held no pride, no defense, only desperation. "Can I stay here just for a while?" The question hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Eleanor looked at her. A part of her softened, a very small, very deep part, but then the memory returned, the phone call, the cold voice. "You'll be fine," she remembered clearly, and she did not forget. But she did not refuse either. "This is still your home," Eleanor said. Vanessa was surprised, not by the answer, but by how easily it came. She had prepared herself for rejection, for blame, but none of that came, only acceptance. She stood up and hugged Eleanor, a rushed, desperate embrace, like someone clinging to the last thing left. Eleanor did not push her away, but she did not hold her the way she once did. There was an invisible distance. Vanessa did not notice, or perhaps she chose not to. That afternoon, she moved her things into her old room. The bed still there, right? The memories still there, but everything now carried a different meaning. She did not return as a daughter. She returned as someone with no other choice. And Eleanor stood in the living room, quietly observing. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had expected. Not too fast, not too slow, precise. Vanessa had come back, not because of love, but because of circumstance. And this time, Eleanor would not let things repeat. She would not save her immediately. She would not fix everything at once. She would let her stay, let her feel, let her understand, and when the lesson came, it would not be forgotten. Hitting rock bottom does not happen in a single moment. It unfolds through a series of long days when a person is forced to face themselves. And Vanessa Whitmore began to understand that through heavy mornings when she woke up in her old room, a place once filled with childhood memories, but now the clearest proof of her failure. There were no more high-end sheets, no more noise of a glamorous city, no more evenings glowing with lights, only a suffocating silence and an emptiness she could not fill. On the first day, Vanessa did not leave the bed until noon. Her eyes open but seeing nothing, her mind spinning with broken thoughts, unanswered questions, and a truth she had not fully accepted, that everything she once believed in had collapsed, and she herself had played a part in that collapse. Eleanor did not push, did not ask too much, she simply let things unfold, but her silence weighed on Vanessa more than any words of blame could have. By the second day, Vanessa was forced to face reality. Her phone constantly receiving calls from banks, financial companies, from people she had never heard of, but who clearly knew who she was. Each call a reminder that she was in debt, and there was no way to escape it. She did not answer, but the messages kept coming, the numbers kept appearing, and the pressure slowly became unbearable. She sat at the dining table, where Eleanor had already prepared a simple breakfast, and for the first time in years, Vanessa felt unworthy of that care. She looked at the woman across from her, the one she had once considered weak, and realized that she was the one who had not been strong enough. "I need to find a job," Vanessa said, her voice quiet but clear, as if she were speaking more to herself than to Eleanor. Eleanor nodded, not objecting, not encouraging, simply accepting. And so Vanessa began. The days that followed were a series of rejections. She went from place to place, carrying her resume and a small hope, but each time she walked out, that hope broke a little more. Employers looked at her background, at the legal issues hanging over her, and shook their heads. No one wanted to take a risk on someone with so many complications, and Vanessa began to understand that her past could not be erased simply by deciding to return. Eventually, she found a job, not one she had ever imagined herself doing, but one she had never even considered before. Cleaning offices at night, low pay, physically demanding, but it was the only option. On the first night, Vanessa stood in front of the building where she would work, looking up at the lit floors where others worked in clean offices, and realized she no longer belonged to that world, at least not for now. The work began with simple tasks that were not easy, mopping floors, taking out trash, wiping desks, things she had never had to do before, and every movement reminded her of the distance between who she used to be and who she was now. An older woman working the same shift looked at her, not judging, not pitying, just observing, and after a while she said, "You're new." Vanessa nodded. "First time?" Vanessa nodded again. The woman gave a small smile. "You'll get used to it. Everyone does." Vanessa was not sure she wanted to get used to this, but she had no choice. In the days that followed, her body ached, her hands blistered, her back sore, but she kept going to work, not because she was strong, but because she had no other option, and that necessity slowly changed her, little by little. She began to understand the value of every dollar, every hour of work, every drop of sweat, things she had never paid attention to before. One evening, as she sat resting after her shift, the woman sat down beside her. "You know," she said slowly, "there are two kinds of people who end up here, those who never had a chance and those who lost it." Vanessa looked down at her hands, silent. "Which one are you?" Vanessa did not answer right away. The question was simple, but it touched something deep inside her. Finally, she said, "I had everything, and I lost it." The woman nodded, not surprised. "Good," she said. "That means you know what you're rebuilding." Those words stayed with Vanessa the entire night. When she returned home, exhausted but more clear-minded than ever, Eleanor was still sitting in the living room reading, as if time had no effect on her. Vanessa stood there for a moment, then said, "I ruined everything." Her voice no longer trembled, no longer denied. It was simply the truth. Eleanor looked up, her gaze unchanged, but deeper. "Then build something better," she said, not comforting, not blaming, just a sentence. But for Vanessa, it was the first time she felt that she could begin again. Change does not come from promises. It comes from actions repeated every single day. And Vanessa Whitmore began to become a different person in a way she did not immediately realize herself. There was no breakthrough moment, no grand vow, just days passing, small choices, quiet but persistent decisions. She still went to work every night, still mopped floors, cleaned desks, took out the trash, but now each movement no longer felt as heavy as before. Her body was still tired, but her mind no longer resisted, no longer felt diminished. Instead, she began to accept that this was part of the journey, not the end, but the beginning. The people on her shift were no longer strangers. They became living stories she had never truly seen before. Older women, single mothers, people who had endured hardships greater than hers, yet still stood strong, still continued. And among them, Helen, the one who had asked her a question she could not forget, became someone Vanessa listened to more. One evening during a break, Helen shared her life, not as a tragedy, not as a complaint, simply as truth. She once had a family, once had a stable life, then everything disappeared after one wrong decision made by her husband, and she had to start again from nothing. No one helped her, no one saved her, only herself, and she did it. Vanessa listened without interrupting, without comparing, simply absorbing, and for the first time, she did not feel like a victim, but someone responsible. That change began to spread into other parts of her life. She started waking up earlier, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She helped Eleanor prepare breakfast, not out of obligation, but because she wanted to do something meaningful, small actions. Yet to Eleanor, they were not small. She observed, as she always had, without interfering, without pushing, simply watching, and in her eyes there was a recognition Vanessa had not seen before, not full forgiveness, but acknowledgement. One day, Vanessa brought home a bag of groceries. Not much, just basic items. But it was the first time she used money she had earned to buy something for someone else. She set the bag on the table without saying anything, but Eleanor understood. "You don't have to," she said. Vanessa shook her head. "I want to." There was no further explanation, but it was enough. Alongside the external changes, something inside Vanessa was shifting as well. She no longer avoided the calls. Instead, she began to face them, speaking with banks, asking questions, learning to understand what she had once ignored, not to fix everything immediately, but to no longer remain in the dark. And through that process, she began to see the full extent of the problem she was facing. No more illusions, no more vague hope, only reality, and a slow but clear determination. Meanwhile, Eleanor continued her own work. Her calls with Caldwell became more frequent. Documents were handled more quickly. She was no longer just learning, she had begun making decisions. Caldwell provided information, but Eleanor chose the direction, and that direction did not change. She did not destroy, she did not expose everything at once. She waited. One evening, Caldwell called, his tone unchanged, but the content was different. "We have confirmation. Marcus forged multiple documents using Vanessa's identity." Eleanor was not surprised. She had already known, or at least suspected, but this confirmation opened a new door. "Can she be cleared?" she asked. "Yes," Caldwell replied, "but it will take time, and it requires careful handling." Eleanor was silent for a second, not out of hesitation, but consideration. This was the point where she could end everything, resolve it all for Vanessa, pull her out of the situation with a single decision. But she did not act immediately, not because she wanted to prolong the pain, but because she understood that if the lesson was not complete, the result would not last. "Start the process," she said, "but keep it quiet." Caldwell did not ask further. He understood this was not just a legal matter, but a process Eleanor was controlling with near absolute precision. Back at the house, Vanessa had no idea what was happening behind the scenes. She continued living her reality, working, learning how to endure, and one evening when she returned, tired but no longer desperate, she sat beside Eleanor without a specific reason, simply wanting to be there. "I met someone today," she said. Eleanor looked up. "She's struggling, worse than me." Vanessa paused, then continued. "I gave her some money, not much, just enough for her kids' daycare." Eleanor did not respond immediately, not out of surprise, but because she recognized something important. Vanessa was no longer thinking only of herself. "Why?" she asked. Vanessa gave a slight shrug. "Because I know what it feels like to have nothing." A simple answer, but to Eleanor it was the clearest sign that the change was no longer superficial. It had gone deep. That night, when Vanessa went to bed, Eleanor sat alone in the living room, the soft yellow light resting on her face. No longer tense, no longer sharp as before, but carrying a quiet sense of peace. not because everything was finished, but because she knew she was on the right path. The lesson was nearing completion, and when the time came, she would not only show Vanessa the truth, she would show her that she had become strong enough to face it. The truth did not arrive like a sudden blow. It came like a slowly rising wave, enough for someone to feel each moment before being completely swept away. And that morning, when Eleanor Whitmore stepped out of the house with Vanessa, she knew everything had finally reached the point where it could no longer be delayed. Vanessa did not know where they were going, only that Eleanor had scheduled a meeting with a lawyer, someone who could help resolve the legal problems weighing on her life. And although she still felt anxious, she followed, because for the first time in weeks, she felt there was a direction, unclear but no longer as lost as before. Caldwell's office was just as it had been the first time Eleanor entered, bright, cold, and precise. But this time, it was Vanessa who felt overwhelmed. She stepped in cautiously, her eyes no longer confident, but carrying the hesitation of someone who had learned that not every place is safe. Caldwell stood to greet them, his gaze passing over Vanessa before settling on Eleanor, a silent confirmation that everything was ready. They sat down. There were no long pleasantries, no unnecessary detours. Caldwell placed a file in front of Vanessa. "You should read this," he said. Vanessa opened it, page by page, line by line. And when the first words appeared, she did not understand at once, but the more she read, the more her expression changed, from confusion to doubt, then to a realization that made her stop. I don't understand," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "These documents say, the debts, they're not mine." Caldwell gave a slight nod. "We found evidence that your signature was forged. You were used without your knowledge." Vanessa looked up, her eyes filled with confusion, as if she were standing between two realities, one she had accepted and one that was slowly replacing it. "But how? Who paid for this investigation?" The question hung in the air, and Caldwell did not answer immediately. He looked toward Eleanor, and in that moment, everything seemed to pause. Eleanor did not rush. She had waited for this moment long enough, and when it arrived, she did not need to create drama, because the truth itself was powerful enough. "I did," she said. Just 2 words, but enough to freeze Vanessa. "What?" Vanessa asked again, not because she did not hear, but because she could not believe it. Eleanor looked straight at her, her gaze unwavering. "Your father left me more than you ever knew." Caldwell slid another file toward Vanessa, and this time, when she opened it, the numbers were no longer distant figures, but an entirely different world. Assets, investments, ownerships she had never imagined. And when she reached the address of the building where she had once lived, her hand stopped. This is my building," she said, almost in a whisper. Eleanor shook her head gently. "No, it was never yours." A long silence followed, heavy as if the air in the room had become too thick to breathe. Vanessa looked up, her eyes red but without tears, only a slow, painful understanding. "You knew?" she said. "You knew all of this when I came back." Eleanor did not avoid it. "Yes. You knew you could fix everything, and you didn't." It was not a question, but a truth spoken aloud. Eleanor nodded. "Yes." Vanessa stood up, stepping back as if physical distance could help her understand what was happening. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking, not from anger, but from not understanding. And that was the moment Eleanor had been waiting for, not to answer, but to ensure that the question came from the right place, from a person who had changed. "Because you needed to learn," she said, her voice calm but not cold. "You needed to understand what it means to lose everything, to work, to be responsible, to see the value of what you had and what you threw away." Vanessa did not speak immediately. She stood there in the middle of the room between 2 people and 2 versions of herself, one who once believed money and opportunity were everything, and one who had just experienced losing it all to realize the opposite. "I hurt you," she said, her voice low, no longer defensive. Eleanor did not respond right away, not because she did not know what to say, but because she wanted Vanessa to continue. "I didn't just leave," Vanessa went on. "I erased you, like you didn't matter." Another silence followed, but this time it was not heavy, it was necessary. "And you still help me," Vanessa said, almost unable to believe her own words. Eleanor shook her head slightly. I didn't help you the way you expected. I didn't give you money so you could continue the same life. I gave you time to become someone else. Caldwell stood up and quietly left the room, leaving the two women facing each other, no longer in the roles of mother and daughter as before, but as two people seeing each other clearly for the first time. Vanessa sat down again, no longer resisting, no longer confused, only acceptance remained. I don't know if I can forgive myself, she said. Eleanor looked at her, and for the first time, her eyes softened, not with weakness, but with recognition. That's not my decision, she said. That's yours. And in that moment, there were no tears, no embrace, no simple ending, only a truth placed between them impossible to avoid, but no longer something to fear, because for the first time, Vanessa was no longer running from it. Six months passed without the noise of a dramatic ending, but as a quiet settling of a long journey where nothing needed to be proven through words anymore, only through the way a person lived each day. And in the small house in Seattle, Eleanor Whitmore and Vanessa Whitmore were no longer two women bound by mistakes and the past, but two people learning to choose each other again, consciously. Morning arrived gently, sunlight streaming through the window onto the dining table where Vanessa was preparing breakfast. Not elaborate, not perfect, but enough. And most importantly, she was doing it not out of obligation, but because she wanted to. Each movement slow and steady, no longer rushed, no longer impatient as before. Eleanor sat across from her, watching, saying nothing. Yet her gaze was no longer distant like in the early days, but carried a quiet recognition. Vanessa still worked, but no longer in nighttime cleaning. She had moved into a support role at a community center. The salary was not high, but that was no longer what mattered most to her. What kept her going was not money, but the feeling of being useful. Each day she met people who were like her a few months ago, people who were lost, afraid, unsure where to begin. And in those conversations, Vanessa was no longer the one searching for answers, but the one sharing, not as someone who had succeeded, but as someone who had failed and was still standing back up. Eleanor changed as well, but in her own way, not loudly, not for display. She and Caldwell completed the final steps to legalize all assets under her direct control, but instead of expanding or accumulating more, she chose a different direction. Part of the assets was turned into a support fund, a small organization with a clear purpose, helping women who had been financially deceived, abandoned, pushed into situations like Vanessa once was, not to rescue them immediately, but to give them a chance to rise the right way. And notably, Vanessa not only knew about the fund, she became part of it, not as an heir, but as someone who truly worked. One afternoon, as mother and daughter sat together on the porch, Vanessa held a letter, not from a bank, not from a lawyer, but from someone she never thought would still be part of her life, Marcus. The letter was sent from a prison in France, short lines of apology, explanation, justification, all written as if he still believed he had the right to be forgiven. Vanessa finished reading, folded it. There was no anger, no tears, only an emptiness she no longer felt the need to fill. He says he's sorry, she said calmly. Eleanor looked at her, not asking more. Do you believe him? Vanessa shook her head lightly. It doesn't matter, she replied. And that was the truth, not because she had forgotten, but because she was no longer bound by it. What Marcus had done no longer defined her, no longer controlled her, and that indifference was the clearest sign of growth. A new project began. The retreat house Vanessa once sold, a place filled with memories, was no longer just an asset, but transformed into a temporary refuge for women who needed a pause. Not a place to hide, but a place to prepare to return to life. Vanessa was the one who proposed the idea, and Eleanor agreed without hesitation, not because she needed another project, but because she recognized that her daughter had begun to see the world as no longer revolving around herself. On the opening day, there was no ribbon cutting, no press, only a few women walking in, carrying untold stories, and Vanessa stood there, not as a savior, but as someone who had once been in that place, her eyes no longer searching for recognition, simply ready. That evening, when everything returned to quiet, Vanessa and Eleanor sat together, without needing many words, only presence. And in that silence, Eleanor thought of Arthur, of the envelope, of what he had left behind, not just assets, but an opportunity for things not to end in the easiest way, but in the right way. Do you regret it? Vanessa asked suddenly. Eleanor looked at her. What? Letting me fall that far? A pause, not because Eleanor did not have an answer, but because she wanted to choose the right way to say it. No, she replied, her voice soft but certain, because if I had stopped you too soon, you would have learned nothing. Vanessa nodded, not arguing, not resisting, because she knew it was true. Not every lesson is comfortable, but the hardest lessons are the ones that stay the longest. That night, when Vanessa went into her room, Eleanor remained alone on the porch, looking up at the sky where the stars quietly existed without needing to be seen. She did not say it out loud, but in her thoughts, she knew she had done what needed to be done, not to protect her daughter from every mistake, but to make her strong enough to stand after making them. If this story makes you think about the relationships in your own life, take a moment to reflect, because sometimes what we need is not to be saved immediately, but to be given the chance to stand on our own. And if you feel this story has meaning, share your thoughts, because every perspective can help someone else understand themselves more clearly. And perhaps your story will be exactly what someone needs to hear. If you have followed this story to this point, you may have realized that sometimes the most painful things are also the most necessary lessons in life. Not everyone is fortunate enough to have a second chance, and not everyone is strong enough to change after hitting rock bottom. What do you think about Eleanor's choice? Do you agree with the way she taught her daughter? Or would you have acted differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective. If this story touched you, don't forget to like and follow so you won't miss the next meaningful stories, because maybe one of them will be exactly what you need to hear at the right moment.